is this really the perfect application for this brand? Do they really go through any sort of process, or do they just like do what they do?
So, how do you kind of discover those small quirks that you're adding to characters, and how does that differ from every client that you're working with?
Yeah, I think I'm like a PDF illustrator, if you will, because it's so much of the research is part of it. I'm going to back that up somehow with some sort of strategy because I don't want pushback, basically.
There was a question that comes up quite often is how do you get hired to create the work for clients that you love? How do you get client work that you actually love creating?
The thing that comes to mind first and foremost is presenting work passionately and fully. Like, because the simplest thing is like, I talk about this often, and I probably talked about it on another part of this, but like people can draw better than me, no question. But to me, it's not about how well I draw per se. It's about demonstrating that I solved the problem and that there was a problem and a solution, and it was value driven and metric driven, and like just trying to share the thought output that came along with the project. I think is a for me and the types of projects that I want to get, which are more involved projects. I think sharing very fully and holistically. And when I say that, I mean showing sketches, talking about the brief, talking about the back and forth revisions, and all of that stuff. I think that's definitely one, just to start us off, is probably the way that I share my work in such a full, intentional way.
I think that's one of the things that I've heard over and over, and I implement that in my process as well. And I'm curious, how do you kind of assemble that portfolio presentation? Do you do it in pieces while as you're going through the process, or do you do it at the end?
It's sort of like when I first started doing it, it was just trying to make the best of what I could with anything that I had left over or left behind, like sketches and stuff like that, almost like manufacturing, like call it a case study or a process and stuff. And then as I started to realize how much I love that and how valuable that also is, like I truly attribute a lot of the reason why I've gotten most of the projects that I have to the way that I present the work. So once I started realizing how valuable that is, I started, but I still don't plan it out in the moment. I try to record more things, or I keep more versions of things, or I take more screenshots of in the process. Or I talk with friends more about like where I'm struggling, because I almost like I will literally go back and like reference text message threads of like when I needed help or like to get unstuck or something like that. So I kind of piece the story back together at the end as it unfolded naturally, because I think if you try to manufacture it too much, of course it doesn't work. So yeah, it's really like it's like a post rational kind of thing.
That kind of reminds me of one of your YouTube videos as well, where you take us through the process of creating Scully. So let's talk about it. How did that become your brand mascot, and what was the thought process like behind it?
Richie Stewart, who is, I truly think is the most brilliant like identity designer ever. He's a really close friend of mine. He was in Boston forever, and I was in New York. And I just wanted, I asked him to make me a logo in like 2013 or something, and he pulled that out, and it was like it was the iconic Mark version of it, and it was just perfect. It's I rant about Richie so much. I think he's just so good at what he does. And so he gave me Scully. I mean, we brainstormed it together, and he gave me a mark that had so much soul in it that I took it and ran with it for years and years. I mean, it's been like 10, 15, I mean, however many years now. And the character keeps evolving, and it's really fun because the character is sort of like, I guess, my muse, maybe, where like if I want to learn clay or 3D or painting, like I will just, rather than being like, okay, I want to learn something new and I'm going to draw something new, I just draw what I know, which is Scully. Um, and it's been such a long process of like, he didn't represent really much at first, and then he started representing more and more and more. And now like he has much more of a life of his own. But he also can take a back seat anytime too, because like lately I'm not working with him at all. And so that's fine too. But yeah, it really came from Richie Stewart.
For our listeners, I think one of the things that we can chat about that could be beneficial is how do you kind of keep those details when you're translating one single product into various platforms?
Simply, like, I think it always comes down for me. I mean, a part of that is like a constraint because my technical abilities aren't there. So I have to lean on simplicity. But I think it's, again, it's the merging of the graphic design world and illustration. It's like, make it work in black and white, like focus on silhouettes. I'll never forget, well, it came out in 2009, so date it back to that. A game called Team Fortress 2, which had just this really revolutionary art style for the time. And they did a lot of behind the scenes commentary about why they developed the characters they did. And for people that don't know, it's like a team based shooting game that's very stylized and kind of cartoony. And they talk a lot about, it's a fast paced game, and you need to immediately be able to recognize if you're going up against the heavy weapons guy that's like got a lot of ammunition and strength, or if you're going up the really fast skinny guy. And so they made their silhouettes wildly different, cartoonishly so. And that really stuck with me. Like, when that was before I was even into any of this stuff. I just thought it was so cool that they had thought about that process. And you could tell them from so far away based on their weapons that they had, based on their proportions. And I think that stuck with me. And so whenever I'm creating characters for brands, usually, especially if it's like something like a mascot, but even if not, I kind of like, for everything that I do, I try to really like pack in way more detail than is necessary. And detail to me doesn't mean like every strand of hair, because it's quite the opposite. Like, I can't render a lot of things, but detail to me is like thoughtfulness and being able to see influence in it. Of like, I often go to like scribbles for on a jacket, like if they have a jacket with a little patch on it. Um, I don't care if it says like Nike or Adidas or anything. In fact, I usually just do a little doodle scribble, because I think the brain can fill in those details of like, oh, that reminds me of when I was a kid and I had that cool starter jacket and it had a little square patch on it. And it's just like playing with those types of details that I think bring familiarity to characters that people can connect with emotionally. Even if it's not the jacket that they had, it's the jacket that someone else had. It's like, it's familiarity that I think is really important when it comes to characters and them being like super recognizable. Yeah.
So, how do you kind of discover those small quirks that you're adding to characters, and how does that differ from every client that you're working with?
The way I find it is through just like loving stuff. And this is like what we talked about earlier in terms of like being a fan of things and like getting away from the
Hmm.
computer, but just like being obsessed. Like, I've always been obsessed with clothes, and I've always been obsessed with like the like rubber, like when a hoodie would come with strings and it would have like the tool dip like rubber coating on the end of it, and it was like a color that I knew wasn't like just from Home Depot. I was like, oh, they mixed like a custom rubber color. Or the patch that go, like any of those little things. Like, I remember when I was a little kid, I wanted these pants that all the skateboarders were wearing that had like a bungee cord on the bottom, and so you could pull it tight and then like pull them halfway up your calf. And I just thought that was like the coolest thing when I was like 10, 11 years old. And I remember just drawing, like when I would doodle at home, I would just draw the characters wearing those pants, because I couldn't have them because we couldn't get them. The internet wasn't around. We couldn't afford whatever it was. I just felt like I was always trying to capture the things that I wanted in my life through drawing them. And I didn't really know how to draw. But now today I get to still go back and like the other thing, like the Legos with, they had the knights with the helmets that the visor would go up and down. And I wanted that so bad. And when I couldn't have it, I would just draw it. And so now today, when I'm doing that sort of stuff, I'm just kind of going back into my mind's imagination of like all the things that I've loved over time and still do. Like, I'm just a fan of clothes and of like all these little details, or like cars. Like, it just, because I like cars, I know that like, okay, if this thing looks like this, people will recognize it because it's a familiar thing. So it really is just like being a fan of stuff outside of it. And then keeping it different for different clients is, I think, the same way like I get obsessed with clothes or cars or skateboarding or whatever. It's like getting indulged in whatever the client's world is, like really fully understanding the world that they're operating in so that you can understand the complexity and nuance of like, if you're doing something for like a tech finance company, like not just doing like a big giant coin, it's like you try to take the route that's like a little bit beneath the surface so that like people are going to be like, oh, they get it. Like the same way, like if I were doing like punk rock music for actual people that are into punk rock or hardcore music, I wouldn't just do like some guy doing this with like a spiky guitar and being like that. That's like a caricature version of it. I would actually get to the subtlety of the nuance of it. And I would try to do that with any industry that I'm in, I think.
Yeah, that's a great point because I think that kind of translates into what you said earlier about graphic design and illustration and kind of bringing that research process with the strategy that you're going in with, because it's not just about really translating it literally, but also thinking about the community aspect of it, the audience aspect of it, because that's definitely different. And it's people who have seen it or grown up with it before and then kind of research that during the, I don't know, the sketch process. So how does that research process kind of ties into your whole storytelling idea and concepting
That's really
phase?
well said, Anika. So helpful having these conversations because I'm like, oh yeah, yeah, no, that makes sense. And there's like, it's kind of like when you agree, I'm like, all right, so it's not crazy. Um, it really is like the fusion of strategy and graphic design branding work. Like so much of my process, I think probably looks more. I spoke with Meg Lewis. Well, I think I mentioned Meg Lewis another time too. But they once described this as like being a PDF illustrator versus a JPEG illustrator, as in sending your illustrations with a deck and a presentation of like, look, here's why and how we're doing all the things that we're doing, versus here's some JPEGs, like I did the thing, like let me know what you think. It leaves you open to so much feedback, which I don't want. And so I'm definitely a PDF illustrator where I'm like, look, this is these are why we did all the steps. We chose blue because of this. We chose large heads because of this. And if you can get the client to nod along with all of the theory and the research, then when you come out with the illustration at the end, they're usually like, yeah, this is exactly what was described spiritually. And so it makes sense. And so, but I think illustrators tend to maybe not quite do that as much as graphic designers. Um, and I think that's where like that fusion is really powerful for me because yeah, I think I'm like a PDF illustrator, if you will, because it's so much of the research is part of it. And also sometimes it's like I'm working backward from like what I want to do, but then like disassembling it and like finding theory in that so that I can ultimately draw like horses with giant heads. But it's like I'm going to back that up somehow with some sort of strategy because I don't want pushback, basically.
So have you noticed kind of like a shift in your process since you first started doing character design and then really kind of justifying the decisions that you're making in your work to now when clients actually trust your vision from the get-go, they know what you're doing and you don't have to do that anymore?
Yeah, I would say so. I would say you said it really succinctly. Um, the more I, yeah, the more confidence I have and the more art direction approach that I take to the way that I go about my illustration or animation or whatever, the more confident they are, the more confident I am. And I think the better the results are. And I think the trick of that is it sounds like things are just getting easier and easier, and in ways they are, but then I'm also still always trying to find new ways to continue to push and evolve and not like I want to like reinvent the process every time, which is part of my a frustration of mine too. Is like once I start feeling comfortable with the process, I want to start reinventing it because I'm like this feels too repetitive, or projects start feeling too similar. Like when you're talking about brand pillars, like how many times is like friendly going to be a brand pillar, and then you're like, oh, I'll use another word for friendly. So then you get uncomfortable with that because you're like, are all these brands going to end up looking the same? Like, are they coming to me because they want my style, or are they coming to me because they want me to figure out what their style is? And there's sort of a chicken or the egg situation, which is just like something I'm like kind of confused by lately. But yeah, I mean, over time, the process has definitely gotten better and easier for me as I've like graduated more into like a little bit more of an art directory role rather than just executing whatever they ask for.
That's interesting because I feel like with that reinvention, there's one thing I'm always curious about because I'm not a character designer. I feel like I always would want to have a component library of things
Hmm.
to go back to. But
Hmm.
if I have that, how do I reinvent my style with
Mm-hmm.
every project that I do and not make it look same per se?
Yeah, there was like a really great class that I don't know if I'll say his last name right, Tom Froese, who's on Skillshare and really prolific like educator, that did a class about like having like one color palette and just like using it over and over and over again, and like that's okay. Completely blew my mind because I always thought I had to reinvent it. And I do think it comes down to maybe the conversation around like, are you a style driven artist or are you a, and is there a mix of the two? Because I think there are certain artists that I personally, sometimes I'll see like two bank brands even work with the same artist and get like almost the same exact outcome. And I can't help but be a little bit like, yeah, I'm like, I don't know. Is like, is this really the perfect application for this brand? Did they really go through any sort of process, or do they just like do what they do? And you would think something like if McDonald's and Burger King both went to the same artist to do the same thing and they did the same thing, it would be like they'd want to look different. Um, so I have these same concerns and struggles because as my work grows and as my library grows, like there is that temptation to be like, I got to draw a flower for this like icon. Let me just go grab a flower from the other project, just modify it a bit. Something about that doesn't feel right. And I don't think that's a good business decision from my end, like, cause I could save hours, but even saying that, like, it's like so often they talk about like, licensing and like, they're like, we all have like, exclusive rights to this artwork. Right. And like, I'll certainly sell them that for money because that's the way business should be. But ultimately I'm like, I was never going to use this illustration for another company anyway. Like everything I make is made for that brand. But maybe I'm missing out on like a major, like cheat and hack of like reusing artwork and then recoloring it for another brand, but it just doesn't feel right to me. And so I'm more on your concern level of like, yeah, I don't want it to keep looking the same. I want it to always feel fresh for a different client every single time, but that's really difficult because my expansion can only grow so far. Like there's only so much style variation I can have. Like it's always going to be like big giant eyeballs and very flat and straight. And sometimes it is like, damn, is this really the perfect execution for them? Or am I just doing what the only thing I know how to do?
That's I think something that you said that really resonated with me in terms of translating it to someone who does branding and brand strategy is the fact that you have to provide a tailored solution for every client that you work with, and it cannot, since you're using the same techniques and your experience, yes, you're providing a solution, but you still have to come up with something that's tailored for their business. And so in saying that, you're not just essentially wasting resources by doing it over every time. You're using that time because now that you are providing a good solution to a problem that actually exists for two different clients, it's better for the business in the bigger picture because essentially those clients will come back and more clients will get attracted to you doing the thing because you're doing it well, and not just because you're just putting it all together. It's not like you're slapping a logo on a thing and then it works for them. So I think that's kind of the differentiating factor that kind of really spoke to me when you said that. So that's pretty cool. Yeah.
Yeah. And I guess if you think about it in terms of like, I don't know, plumber or right, or like a hard, somebody that's going to come and do like a wood crafting or something. It's like, you don't really care if they just did this. And plumbing maybe isn't the perfect because it's less artistry, but even like carpentry, maybe, right? It's like, I don't care if my chairs look the same as the guy that you just finished up last week. Like, it's fine. Like, I came to you because I want you to do the chair. So just do the thing and get it done fast and get it done good. Whereas the crafts person is thinking like, oh, I just did this chair style. Like, I want to reinvent, but I think it's more up to them to like scratch their own itch. Cause I think that on the client side, most of them are like, I don't care if you already did this style of character. We want this style of character. It's cool. So I think worrying about it less would be a good advice to my own self, I think.
Yeah, no, I feel that. I think on the topic of worrying, I think I always, and I know we touched on this at our previous episodes as well, where we were chatting about perfection and how do you even know when it's time to stop working on something. And I know this is a common struggle in the industry as well. So do you have like a formula for that?
Yeah, it's clients. Like I've been pretty lucky that I've never really gotten like beaten down too much by the perfection bug. I mean, I suppose I have, but I know that people struggle with it a lot more than me, so I don't claim that as a difficulty that I struggle with. I don't get to claim that trauma basically, but like, mostly clients like keep, I'm like, well, it's fucking done because it's got to be done.
Mm.
In terms of like how many hours up until the day that it's done, it's like that's infinite. But fortunately, usually, and I learned like clients care a lot less than, and we know this, I think everyone knows this, but like clients care less about the perfection than we do, and we're our own worst critic and blah, blah, blah. But I think as a result, like I will say I'm pretty happy to say that I don't get too beaten up by it even in personal projects, I would say for the most part. I think what I do is rather than perfecting a thing, I will scope creep where like if I'm doing the Scully wooden toys, I'm like, all right, cool. These are done, but I'm like, oh wait, but what if I did boxes instead of bags? And then I'm like, and then the bat, I'm like, oh, for the box, what if I do laser etching on the boxes? And then I'm like, okay, what if I do, and then it's like, well, I'll do custom packing peanuts. And so I'm good at like creeping my scope, but I'm pretty good at being like, it's done. And I think that's one of the good things that's come out of social media for me is like, it's kept me pretty much like just moving and being like, it's done, it's fine, let's move on. I can always come back to it if I want or like make another thing.
Mm.
Yeah, I think if there's advice to be had around that, I don't know what it is, but probably doing like a 30-day challenge or like doing something. And I remember one time I filled a notebook because I was getting a little bit sacred, and I filled a little junky notebook every day, and then I didn't even take photographs of it, and I just burned it at the end as like a way to try to be like, look, this doesn't matter, like it's fine, you can just you can draw forever. And I think that wasn't like a revolutionary thing for me, but I just remember that felt like, yeah, that was nice. And I was like, man, I kind of wish I captured that or took pictures of it. But I was like, no, I'll just draw more. It just gives you an excuse to keep drawing more. So I think any way that you can be a little bit less sacred with your work is actually sometimes a strong suit.
Mm. Done is better than perfect, as they say. I
Big
feel
time.
like we always, everything that we talk about kind of ties into those cliche things that people always say, but it is true. Like drawing inspiration from everyday life or watching an F1 documentary and thinking about how they film stuff and could
Yep.
be something that you do. And then watching like a hockey documentary and thinking about transitions that they're making or the animations that are happening. And
Yep.
those are some things that I do personally. And I look at those and I'm like, oh, maybe I can take something from this setup and think about how I can not only use that in my workflow, but for people that I'm working with.
Yep.
Um, and so one of those instances kind of actually helped me with a YouTuber that I work with. And you get
Mhm.
in your head creating stuff for YouTube too, because how do you keep it fresh and how do you keep it
Right.
going, especially if you're new to the platform? And then just having that idea and having that in my memory bank helped me. So yeah,
Mm.
I
Mm.
think there's something to the cliches after all.
They're there
Yeah.
for a reason, and they're like
Yeah.
bulletproof from like hundreds of years. It's like it's kind
Mm.
of when some of these have been around for like literally hundreds of years. It's like, yeah, okay, I guess I'm convinced it's a good one.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, I think one of the other things that I was curious about too, and this is kind of a fun one, where every time I look at every character design of any sort, I always look at like details of it. Do you ever put Easter eggs in your work?
Yeah, I think that's like part of the deal with like working in Adobe Illustrator too. But even if I
Mm.
didn't, but like Illustrator is so easy to just like zoom in and like I remember like early on when I was learning Illustrator, it was like I would put like things under hats or like under a shirt for no reason. But I think it's like I remember saying this in the past. I think it matters. I don't know how to say this in a more eloquent way, but like it matters. Even if it's just like the energy that you are putting into it. I think people can tell. I have to hope, right? Because like otherwise, I've wasted a lot of time in my life. But I've also like I've made mention of this to friends where I've been like, man, I spend like way too much time like doing. But they all say like, no, that's what makes you you. I remember once I did my first shirt that I thought was pretty cool. It was like a long sleeve black shirt and with just white. So it was just one color, which is kind of like out of my world because I'm so like detail oriented where I use lots of color. And I remember telling my friend, like, man, I'm worried that like this shirt isn't me enough. Like I like it, but it doesn't feel like a BoneHaus shirt. and his name is Adam Danielson, really close friend of mine, and like very much like a mentor in ways. He was like, dude, it's not a BoneHaus shirt because of the amount of colors you use. It's a BoneHaus shirt because I did bones down the sleeves. I did arm bones, and I had one of them broken, and it had a bandage around it because it tied into the story of like how he lost his arm once. And he's like that detail, that's what makes it a BoneHaus. And then like I had a hem tag where like on one side it said BoneHaus, but then when you flipped it, it was Scully winking at you. And so like those like surprises and excitement and stuff like that, I think is what helps make my work like unique, not necessarily detailed as in like the perfect detail, but more in the thoughtfulness to it. So yeah, I pack them in, and I think many go unnoticed, but at the same time, I think they're invisible, like magical little details or something that like people feel, but they don't see maybe. I don't know.
I love that. And I think that kind of ties into and closing this episode is what would be the one thing that you would tell creators today to how to narrative shift into telling their story more to the internet and their community?
Yeah. I think it's a lot of what we said today, and careful not to totally recap it, but I think it also ties into some of the other conversations we've had of like the more you can put into like you have to be excited about the stuff that you're working on, or you don't have to, but it's very helpful if you can be really excited about the stuff that you are working on, because you will spend the extra time to put in the extra thought, the extra effort. I have to believe that those things are worth it. Because again, like I'm sure you could get a lot of my work done 90% as good in a quarter of the time. But there is like this kind of magical trait to it that I think is important in terms of like bringing in the stuff that you love, like you said earlier, finding the references and inspiration from the other things that you're into, searching wide and far for that. And I think you usually can pack it into client work too, but if you can't, do personal work. And like, like what's your favorite movie? And can you draw like a sticker pack of like 32 stickers from your favorite movie? That's like a really like niched down movie too, right? And like, how can you find like every element of like things that only people that are super fans of that movie would know and understand and get? I think it's fun. Like it kind of goes to that like digging a little deeper too, right? If like somebody that's never played hockey in their life made like a hockey sticker pack, they're gonna do hockey stick and puck and whatever. But somebody that's super into hockey would pack in like all of these like fun, subtle things that most people aren't gonna understand, but the people that do get it are gonna love it. And to me, I think that's a very special thing for people to become like super fans of stuff of like, oh, I feel seen in this silly little hockey sticker pack. So yeah, like digging a layer deeper, I think is another really good one.
And that kind of very cleverly ties into our conversation for next time, which is putting human elements into our illustration styles. So, yeah, that's it for today. Thank you so much, Kirk, for being here. I truly enjoyed our conversations. And I think there's so much to take away from every one of these, not just for the audience, but for me personally. And yeah, I love it. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Anika. See you soon.